At dusk, when the zoo had already closed for visitors, the zookeeper David heard a strange sound like crying. When he approached the tiger's enclosure, he saw Tigress Luna holding a small tiger cub in her teeth. Slowly, as if afraid of hurting the baby, she approached the bars and carefully placed the cub in front of David. The tigress looked the keeper straight in the eyes as if trying to tell him something. David tremblingly took the cub in his arms and noticed a small tag on its paw, which made his heart squeeze. David had worked at the small Ohio Zoo for over 15 years. He arrived before the gates opened and left long after sunset. He memorized the patterns of every bird call, the rhythm of every footstep, and the subtle shifts in behavior that most people never noticed. The animals were his second family, and the enclosures felt more like neighborhoods than cages. Among them all, one bond stood out: his connection with Luna. Luna was a Bengal tigress, rescued as a cub from an illegal wildlife operation. She had arrived malnourished, terrified, and feral. David was the only one she allowed near her. He was the one who fed her by hand, who sat outside her enclosure for hours, whispering softly while she learned that not all humans meant harm. Over the years, she grew strong, majestic, and fiercely loyal. But something had changed. For days, Luna paced endlessly, eyes dark and distant, fur bristling at even familiar faces. She growled at the staff, even at David once, something she had never done. Her food remained untouched, her breathing shallow. She flinched at sounds she used to ignore. The shift was sharp and unnerving, as if some ancient instinct had been awakened inside her. David stood by her enclosure well after visiting hours ended, watching her with quiet concern. He checked her vitals, reviewed security footage, and asked every keeper for details. But there were no clear answers. He had seen animals grieve, fall ill, and grow old. But this was something else. Luna wasn't sick. She was waiting for something. Or someone. That night, after closing, David returned once more with a flashlight and a quiet voice. As he approached, Luna stepped forward from the shadows. Cradled in her powerful jaws was a small tiger cub. David froze. The zoo had no record of any births, and Luna hadn't been pregnant. The cub looked no older than a few weeks. She laid him at David's feet, eyes locked on his. The cub let out a soft, rasping cry. David dropped to his knees, heart pounding. Luna remained still, watching him with a stare that felt closer to language than instinct. It wasn't fear. It wasn't aggression. It was trust. She had chosen him. With trembling hands, David picked up the cub. His fur was warm and soft, his heartbeat rapid. Around his paw was a thin plastic tag. David brought the cub into the infirmary and examined the tag under brighter light. A sequence of numbers, faint scratches, and an unfamiliar barcode were etched into it. The tag was foreign, not issued by any internal system, and not matching any of the zoo's inventory. David's stomach turned. The cub hadn't been born here. He had been brought in from somewhere else. The implications weighed heavily. He didn't call the director. He didn't report the discovery on the internal system. Instead, he made quiet notes, hid the cub under medical care protocols, and began his own investigation. If someone had smuggled in a cub, why? How? And what did Luna know that made her deliver him directly to David? He needed answers, and he had to find them alone. At dawn, David entered the administration building with the tiger cub wrapped in a blanket. His hands trembled as he showed the director the tag and explained Luna's strange behavior. The director barely glanced up, offered a half smile, and suggested it was probably just a mix-up with records. His voice was calm, almost amused, as if David were a nervous intern and not a man who had spent 15 years among predators. After his shift, David locked himself in the staff computer room and began searching wildlife registries. He uploaded photos of the tag, cross-checked databases, and sent messages to conservation agencies, hoping for some lead. Hours passed in silence. The only responses he received were automated acknowledgments and a vague recommendation to speak with management. The next day, he visited the state wildlife office in person. The official behind the desk smiled politely, read through David's handwritten notes, and explained that there had been no recent reports of a missing cub. When David insisted on the urgency, she quietly mentioned that cases like this often go unresolved. Her eyes drifted to the clock. He realized she wanted him gone. When David returned to work, he noticed a shift in how the staff treated him. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. One keeper made a joke about imaginary cubs. Another hinted that David was too emotionally attached to Luna. That evening, someone had moved his locker. On his clipboard was a note. "You should take some time off." For the first time in his career, the zoo felt hostile. The call came just after dusk. The voice on the other end was distorted and clipped, offering no name. Only an address on the outskirts of town and a warning: "Come alone." David hesitated, the line buzzing with static before going dead. Something in his gut told him this was it. The thread he had been searching for. He drove in silence, heart pounding as the city lights gave way to crumbling warehouses and shadows that moved without sound. The building was a repurposed storage facility, its windows blacked out, and its interior lit by flickering fluorescence. Inside, rows of cages were lined against the walls. Monkeys, exotic birds, reptiles. But in the far corner, behind a tarp, he found a shipping crate stained with blood and straw. Inside were clumps of tiger fur and traces of tranquilizers. On the ground nearby, he spotted tags identical to the one he had removed from the cub's paw. One still bore Luna's ID number, scratched but legible. His breath caught in his throat. The truth was unbearable. Luna had given birth in captivity. Her cub had been stolen at birth, trafficked before she could even see it. He staggered back, ball rising in his throat. Somehow, impossibly, Luna had known. Her instincts, her grief, her aggression, it had all been grief. She had tracked her cub, perhaps by scent, perhaps by something deeper, something ancient. And somehow, the cub had returned. Maybe someone with a conscience had left it. Maybe Luna had intimidated the smugglers. He would never know. But the truth was undeniable. A mother had found her child against all odds. A sudden crash behind him sent him spinning. Two men blocked the exit, one holding a crowbar, the other a knife. They shouted, advancing quickly. David ran. The hallways blurred. He shoved over a stack of crates, glass and feathers exploding into the air. He took a blow to the shoulder, but didn't stop. Bursting through a side door, he rolled down an embankment and disappeared into the woods. Clutched in his jacket were the tags and a smuggler's ledger, still warm from his chest. It wasn't over, but now he had the proof. David sat in the dimly lit office of the local police department, his hands trembling as he slid a worn folder across the desk. Inside were photographs, shipping tags, audio recordings, and the bloody ledger he had pulled from the smuggler's hideout. The officer flipped through the pages slowly, her expression sharpening with every turn. Without a word, she stood and left the room. 20 minutes later, an emergency task force was being briefed, and a coordinated raid was underway. Under the cover of night, law enforcement stormed the compound. Floodlights shattered the dark, illuminating the cages and terrified animals within. Dozens of officers moved through the facility with precision, shouting commands and subduing resistance. One of the smugglers tried to escape out the back, but was tackled and handcuffed in the mud. Within an hour, the entire operation was dismantled. Lions, leopards, monkeys, and birds, every one of them tagged for transport, were recovered alive. The air was filled with a tense mixture of chaos and relief. News vans gathered outside the gate, and soon, footage of the raid made its way to every major network in the region. At the zoo, word spread fast. The public was invited for a special announcement, and the viewing deck near Luna's enclosure filled quickly with families and reporters. When the gate slid open and the tiger cub was brought out under careful supervision, the crowd fell silent. Luna, watching from the other end of the enclosure, let out a low sound, half growl, half whimper. The cub responded with a chirp, trotting clumsily toward her. The reunion was immediate and overwhelming. Luna nudged the cub with her nose, then lay down beside him, her massive paws curling protectively around his body. A collective gasp ran through the crowd, followed by applause, tears, and the soft click of dozens of camera shutters. Standing before a forest of microphones, David took a breath and began to speak. His voice was raw, his words slow and deliberate. He detailed the nights of doubt, the fear, the pain, and the undeniable bond between a mother and her child. He spoke not as an employee of the zoo, but as a witness to something both tragic and sacred. He asked the public to look beyond the bars of the enclosures, to understand the souls behind the stripes and fur. By the end of his statement, his voice cracked. There were no dry eyes in the crowd. A month later, David stood on a stage beside city officials as a medal was placed around his neck. The citation read, "For courage, compassion, and commitment to the voiceless. Cameras flashed as he held the award to his chest. It was not the praise he had sought, but the acknowledgement meant something because it meant Luna's story had been heard. Donations poured into the zoo from across the country. Volunteers signed up in record numbers, and a foundation was created in David's name to fund animal welfare and anti-trafficking efforts. New habitats were built, security systems upgraded, and educational programs launched to teach children about wildlife conservation. Luna and her cub became more than just residents of the zoo. They became a living reminder of resilience, of maternal instinct, of the thin line between captivity and freedom. Visitors came from other states just to see them. Tour guides told their story daily, and a mural was painted at the entrance to the zoo, Luna's eyes, fierce and full of memory, watching over all who entered. David often returned to the enclosure after closing hours, sitting quietly near the glass as the moon rose over the treetops. He watched Luna stretch, her cub tumbling clumsily beside her, safe and full of life. His hands would tighten around the railing, and tears would come, slow and unashamed. Because in that moment, he knew he had done something that mattered. In a world full of cruelty and noise, he had helped one mother find her child. And that, he thought, was enough.